For some reason, there was a fear of going into this Italian community. And, we were kind of happy that there was a fear also.
The Hill is St. Louis's Little Italy.
Immigrants used to come and work hard, and they bought a house, they had a family, and they didn't know that that was the American dream.
To them, it was a marathon. It wasn't a sprint. It was a life that they created, and it was circled around the church, and it was circled around their work, and it was circled around their family.
Everyone's grandmother lived with them. I mean, what community has families down the street? Uncle Lou was over here and everybody else was over here. Everybody had that. You kidding me?
We have started back in the mid-1800s, and we're still going on, and people are dying to get into this neighborhood.
We have 52 square blocks. We have residents, and we have businesses side by side. We are the last real Italian neighborhood in the whole United States.
The place we call the Hill today has had a storied history before it was the Italian Hill. It had been a spa in the early 19th century, and then it had been a home for French Icarian communists. And then someone discovered in the 1870s, 1880s, that the clay there was perfect for making brick tile and terracotta and fire brick.
Many brickyards evolved, steel mills, coin-making factories, allowed for the explosion of industry in this area near the hill. It became a hotspot for jobs. Jobs usually brought a lot of immigrants. Why did the immigrants come? There were many reasons. Poverty being the greatest, suppression of them. These were peasants, small town people, subjugated by the nobles and land barons. Political unrest, famine, brought all of them here.
When I listened to the stories of my grandparents growing up, they left Italy to make a better life for their families. They came to the States with very little. I can remember my grandmother telling me she came with a paper bag in hand.
When we come over, when we hear about America and Europe and Sicily, you look like you go to paradise. But when you come here, it's a winter. It's no paradise anymore.
When the Italians arrived, They really had no skills other than they're willing to endure long hours for low wages. But they had been preceded by African Americans in that area.
It was, I guess, like the Mexicans are doing today. They're all looking for a job, and the people here don't want those jobs. Well, they didn't want those jobs either. My grandparents both worked in the clay mine. Well, one was worked in the clay mines, one worked in the brick yards, and my dad worked in the foundry. He used to come home from working in that foundry. The calluses on his hands would be so thick, he used to take a knife and cut them off.
Every night when the men would be walking up from the clay mines back to the hill, they would raise their hands and say, "La Montaña, La Montaña," and they would make the trek up the hill. So that's how the hill got its name.
A lot of the men who came alone. And there were not that many women around, and probably not many Italian women. There probably were other women that they could meet after they had worked their day in nearby places of entertainment, but they may not have had the opportunity to marry an Italian girl.
If you're 20 years old in America, you want to get married, are you going to spend the money and time, months, going back to Sicily or Lombardy to find a bride? Why not ask your mother, find me a nicer girl just like you?
Every once in a while, one of these men, these Northern Italian men, would get a letter from one of their neighbors. And it would say, "How you doing in America," in essence. "Got a nice job? Oh, by the way, here's a picture of our daughter. What do you think? She looking nice. Bring her over. I'll marry her." And these were called picture brides.
My grandmother's family sent the picture over when he asked for a bride. She was 18 years old at the time, and he was a young man working in the clay mines. He was about 6 years older than my grandmother. And so they sent her over, and she came as an 18-year-old bride.
If you were a young woman in Cajono, you had three options. You could become a nun, a suora. You could become a zitella, an old maid, or best bet, an Americana, a picture bride or an Italian-American bride in America. They were not marrying for love. They were marrying for survival.
And so religion and faith were very strong with your Italian immigrants, as most people know that. And it translated into the need and desire to build a church once you had enough people. It looked like a small Protestant clapboard building with a heightened roof and a steeple. And as it grew, it became a fixture in the neighborhood. However, in 1921, that church burned down.
That is a real challenge. It's a crisis for the community. The Hill bonds together and decides we're not just going to rebuild, we're going to build something spectacular.
To build that church, they knew they wanted to build it to last, and that was going to take money. So they did everything from selling every brick of the church to stained glass windows with the famiglia, the family names on it, to the communion rail, which is still there, which is Italian marble.
1921. The immigrants have been there now for at least a generation and becoming very successful. Not only still working in the many factories, making decent money, but now owning businesses and making more than decent money.
Everybody said that they would give $1 a month for 5 years, which was a lot of money back then, and they saw it through.
Eventually, it cost about $285,000, finished in 1926, and was paid off in 10 years.
The Hill is an Italian community that revolved around the church. I'm not sure there's another Italian-American community where the church has been so central to communal life.
Oh, it's the place where people meet. It's the place where people come to get baptized and buried and married. It's a place where, you know, particularly this group of people, the northern and the southern Italians, can come and be together.
People on the hill originally came from Italy. They had nothing. They had to believe in someone and something. So faith was critical to their overall well-being and development.
But if that church hadn't been there, there'd be no hill. I can guarantee you that. It's like the church in Milano. In Milano, the church is the highest point in that neighborhood. Nothing is permitted to be built higher than the statue of the Madonna in the Milano Cathedral. And nothing in that neighborhood has been built higher than that church.
And so now architecture is a big deal for the neighborhood besides the church. And in particular, which has grown now to be an affection more than anything, is our so-called famous shotgun homes. Actually, the concept started back in Louisiana when they used to tax homes by their width. The more narrow the house, cheaper the tax. But actually, it's an efficient way, when you look at them, to put a lot of homes on one block.
There are houses where the rooms are just stacked up one behind the other with no hallways or general circulation. You circulate from one room to the other by going through the next room.
Basically, if you fired a shot at the front door, a shotgun, it would go all the way through and hit the back door. There's nothing, no walls gonna get in your way. And basically, that's what it was. You walked into the place, it was a living room. You walked through the living room, you walked into a bedroom. But you'd have then the kitchen, and then you're out the door. Shotgun house.
My brother and I had a bedroom together. We had twin beds, then my mother and father, and then we had the kitchen. And the bathroom was out in the backyard. So if you had to get up in the middle of the night, you had to get your father out of bed, which you hated to do.
I think about my parents and those old timers that worked with nothing. There was nothing here. They built the homes. There's some of the homes built right down here on Daggett. They were built with lumber from the World's Fair.
Most of the Italians, let's face it, most of the Italians that came to this country were peasants. They didn't own anything. They got here and now they own property. That was a big thing for them. They couldn't own property back in Italy. Here, they own property and they're proud of it and they want to show it to people at its best.
Because the immigrants didn't have money in many cases for basements, they built these homes on stilts and then filled in the basements later when they could afford it with stone, brick, concrete, or whatever. And then sometime during Prohibition, you had to make room for a false basement for the still, but that's a whole nother story.
To understand Prohibition, you have to understand it's part of a series of laws, interestingly aimed at immigrants. Almost all Catholics hated Prohibition. Almost all Protestants thought if we just got rid of liquor, it's going to be a panacea. Everything's going to be perfect.
I solemnly promise, God helping me, to abstain from the use of all distilled, fermented, and malt liquors. Amen, amen, amen.
St. Louis was actually a fairly significant player in the industry of alcohol with the Anheuser-Busch company, that type of thing. So it wasn't very popular, and there was a lot of money to be made in the production of alcohol. So bathtub stills, basement stills, these things kind of popped up everywhere, and the Hill was not immune to that.
I could say 98% of the people I talked to, I'm talking about 100, 200 people I talked to, every one of them said their father or grandfather made moonshine.
Well, I lived with a lot of stills on the hill. My dad was, when he was a kid, he had a bicycle and he used to, he delivered booze to places. He used to deliver cans of alcohol. He got $1 a can for delivering it to wherever it went.
There used to be a family on Dugan Avenue. They used to make it in their basement. And a lot of them had double basements, where if you go down there, it'd be a regular basement, but then there'd be another one down there where they make the booze and all that.
There was one guy that built a still over on Northrop Avenue. And he was smart enough that he piped the stuff over to Shaw Avenue. One day it snowed, and the heat from the booze going through the pipes melted the snow, and you could follow that line.
My dad had a huge garden, and we were cultivating it. One day I told my dad, "Dad, I hit a pipe." He said, "Cover up, don't worry about it." I said, "But there's a pipe, Dad, it runs all across." "Don't worry about it, just cover it up." I said, "Okay, Dad." Down the street, we're playing ball, and all the police come and they raid this house, and they bust a still. The guy was making booze there and pumping it up a whole block away to another house where they would put it in cans and distribute it.
I've got stories in my head, how they were very creative in hiding the moonshine, putting it on soda trucks, sodas on the outside, moonshine on the inside, putting on buses that took the women to the garment factories, and then having the moonshine underneath and delivering it after they dropped the women off.
It is likely that there was someone who was organizing, who could control distribution to other parts of St. Louis County, St. Louis City, to even parts of Illinois.
I can tell you there was a guy named that would supply the sugar for the booze, called Sugar Vince.
Sugar Vince, he bought and sold sugar. You see, back then, there used to be a company in St. Louis called Meyer Brothers. You could get 100 pounds of sugar for $6. But they never sold it to anybody except soda factories, bakeries, things like that.
We were approached a lot of time by certain people who wanted to buy sugar. No, we never did do that. We could have probably made a lot of money, and I'd probably be dead now. Not by natural causes either.
You can tell a lot about a community and how it responds to challenges. But certainly the Great Depression is an existential challenge in a lot of ways. So in 1929, stock market collapses. St. Louis is not well situated to handle this. St. Louis is hit particularly hard, and the Hill has to scramble.
In my house, whenever, during the Depression, if you ate an orange, my mother would give you a slice of bread. If you was gonna eat grapes, you got a slice of bread. And I'd just say, "Mom, what you get me the bread?" It'll fill your stomach up.
When we were kids, we took a bath in an aluminum tub. My mother would warm the water on the stove. We had a pot-belly stove. She'd get up every morning and get that going so it would be warm so we could get out of bed. And sometimes we went to bed with our clothes on because it was so cold.
Well, during the Depression, the trains used to have to slow down. When they did, we'd jump on the coal cars, and as they were going by, we used to throw coal off and then go back later on with wagons and wheelbarrows and bring it home. Nobody had any money on the hill in those days.
During the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I'll go back that far, probably 75 or 80% of the people that lived on the hill walked to work.
There was no such thing as having cars at that time. There were very, very, very few cars, if any at all.
It's sort of funny, although growing up on the hill, my dad had no driver's license. His brother Lou had no driver's license. His brother Dan had no driver's license. But at that time, it was just you walked around and everything was there. There was probably a confectionery on every corner.
There was grocery stores, taverns, dry goods stores. Everything that you could possibly want was here on the hill.
We had a school, we had a bank. You know, what did you need in life? You know, we had a movie theater, which was a Columbia Theater, which was a way the parents would get rid of us on a Sunday.
We had a funeral parlor. I mean, how many neighbors could have a funeral parlor in their neighborhood? You could be born here, live your whole life, and when you pass away, they could bury you here because you had a funeral parlor.
We were different. The neighborhood was 2/3 Lombard descent, 1/3 Sicilian descent, and since our Sicilians were embedded with these Lombards, we took on some of their personality. We were more laid back than your typical Southern Italian. Yeah, when you think of Italians in America, you go, hey, this, hey. No, that's Southern Italians. Northern Italians are more European, okay, more conservative in their approach to things. And that was the nature of this neighborhood compared to other Italian neighborhoods.
On the hill, there was a huge chasm between North Italy and South Italy. And both North Italians and Americans looked down upon Southern Italians.
It goes back to the old country, to Italy. Italy, until 1859, there were numerous different Italian states, and there was always a rivalry and an animosity between them because they're constantly fighting going back to the Middle Ages for territory or recognition.
There's a definite divide. The best way to explain it would be New Yorkers compared to people from Alabama or Mississippi. We say we're all Americans, but there's a distinct difference there, and that's kind of the way it's how they're viewed and how they view each other.
Do you know if there was any Northern versus Sicilian Italian prejudice on the hill?
Tremendous prejudice on the hill. and there, I remember the Sicilians used to get very upset when they heard someone say "Vindanoon," which meant one of us.
I said, what? I thought we were all Italian. Maar those days they were even married. I know a couple of guys that married a Sicilian woman. They got thrown out of the house. And the girl, they got thrown out too. I didn't know until I was married, not before.
There's a big difference because the people speak different dialects. And you could be living next door to somebody you didn't have the foggiest idea what that person was saying.
You start talking with the Sicilian dialect, and a Northern Italian would stop you. And they immediately said, wait, no capisce, you know? We speak Italian here. Oh, scusi, okay.
Well, I even hate to say this, but my mother hated Sicilians. I mean, she just didn't agree with the Sicilians. And it was just so different. I mean, I think all of them, there was just something between the Lombards and the Sicilians that they couldn't get along.
At one time, the Sicilians and Lombards were like two animals that didn't want to get along together. And it went on a long time. Until the younger people got together and we were going to school together. We had no reason to fight each other.
Every block had a club, athletic clubs, because we always used to play softball against each other. There were the Stags, the Ravens, the Hips, the Cubs.
The Fawns, the Hawks, the Wildcats.
You got the Vikings, oh my God, I can go on and on. And one of the things that happened to us is that we met a guy from the Southside YMCA called Joe Casino. We used to call him Uncle Joe.
Joe Casino may be as important as any of the priests in the 1940s.
He was instrumental in keeping this neighborhood from going to hell. But starting these sports clubs prevented the formation of gang-like activity versus sports social-like activity.
One of the great challenges to the Hill is the second generation boys. Across America, you'll read a lot of stories about gangs, particularly Italian gangs. I mean, think about this. Your dad wants you to be Italian, but you're really American, and you're getting in fights a lot in schools. And Uncle Joe comes in and says, basically, what's the matter with you? He said, why are you fighting one another? He used sports as a medium of uniting the Hill, but particularly harnessing youthful energy in a positive way.
Some of the greatest athletes in sports history emerged from these clubs on the Hill started by Joe Casino. Most notably, Yogi Berra and Joe Garagiola.
Baseball was in their blood. I mean, that's all they cared about. Yogi that was his whole game, baseball, morning, noon, or night. He talked baseball, loved to play baseball. That's why he didn't do too well in school. He was too much on baseball. And at that time, they never called him Yogi. His name was Lawrence Peter Berra, and his mother called him Lottie. Because she couldn't pronounce Larry, she called him Lottie.
He used to sit out when we were in the park. He'd sit there with his leg crossed all the time. We would sit by the lights and the lamppost or so, or maybe on Elizabeth playing. And then when he went to play minor league ball, he was sitting there on the bench, and one of the fellows went by and he said, looks like a Yogi.
Yogi Berra, I went to the same school he was in. And he was a hell of a ball player. We used to play with 14-inch softball. And in the school, they used to have a recess, about a half hour or so. They used to play ball. He used to knock that ball out of the schoolyard.
I pitched a little batting practice to Yogi because I had a good arm and I was a young kid, but I didn't want to throw the ball down the middle of the plate because he would hit me with it if I did. But Yogi was a heck of a hitter. Joe and Yogi were both good ball players. All around athletes, Joe was the best, but Yogi was the best hitter.
Well, when we used to play with a little pickup game, we used to split Yogi and Joe up. Couldn't have them both on the same team. And Joe would pitch one day and Yogi would catch. And then we play another team and it'd be vice versa. And we did that for a whole summer.
They would leave in the morning, they would go to other neighborhoods around the area, they would play ball against other neighborhood kids. And as my uncle would say many times, he wasn't even the best ball player on his block because Yogi Berra played on his same team.
You know, the Hill, we know about the baseball players that lived on the Hill and grew up, but baseball wasn't the sport. Soccer was the sport that a lot of the neighborhood kids played. There was 3, 4, 5 different neighborhood soccer teams that played on the Hill.
The two pillars of sport in St. Louis because of permanence, longevity, baseball and soccer. But in particular, the sport of soccer and what 5 guys from the Hill did on June 29th, 1950, defeating England in the World Cup in Brazil, brought international acclaim to the city of St. Louis.
Oh man, you talk about a Hill proud. That was a proud day. Especially when they carried Frank Borghi off of the field. Oh, what a day that was.
If you looked at a sweeping view of America, World War II is both kind of the high water mark for many Italian American communities, but also the beginning of the end. This is the perfect storm. You have Italian families with lots of sons, and they're embarrassed by Mussolini.
FDR was about to incarcerate Italian Americans like he did Japanese Americans, and we heard about that.
The Italians, they were faced with a lot of prejudice. Example, when Missouri Bakery opened up, and they didn't put the name of the owner, Gambero, on the trucks because kids would throw rocks at it.
You go places and you're Italian, you what? You know, things like that. Like they resented us. And believe it or not, we didn't resent them. We went there to do business and stuff like that. Some of us even stay away from the business because they were Italian.
I remember as a kid, they sent me to the hardware store. I did, then I was standing there looking around, and some jackass, whatever you want to call him, come up to me and said, "Hey, Dago, get back there on the hill."
Percentage-wise, Italian Americans went into the military more than any other ethnic neighborhood in the country to show their patriotism. And they flocked to the Army drafting stations.
I'd be hard-pressed to name another neighborhood that was as patriotic and supportive of the war as the Hill. One block, I think, on Daggett Avenue sent 55 young men to the war. I mean, it's extraordinary.
I was about 3 or 4 years old when my dad got drafted into the service. It nearly wiped the Hill out of young people, I want to tell you. It was tough times though, because a lot of families were without people that were making a few bucks for them, so tough times.
But the Hill was proud of their boys fighting for the American cause. And what makes that a little more interesting, I think, is these are Italians going over to fight Italians. So, you know, it's kind of mixed feeling there.
So the church organized this newspaper, this newsletter called the Crusader Clarion, to keep the boys in touch with the Hill. And it was sent to everyone on the Hill and in service.
It was a magazine of everybody that was in the service, and they wrote where they were, how they were feeling, how was the people at home, and things like that. Every time we got one of those papers, that's the first thing we do is look and see if somebody's in there that we knew and where they were at.
We got that every month. It came. Crusader Clarion came every month. And what that you knew where your buddies were, And you knew some of the guys, I didn't know where he's at. He was in the Pacific somewhere. Oh no, it was very, very helpful. And we all knew where everybody was.
All the guys in the service looked forward to that because it was news from home. We knew who was where and how they were doing, or who was sick, who was injured, who was killed, you know.
Every home as you walked along the hill. At that time, if you had someone serving in the service, you put a star in the window. Some had 2, 3, and 4 stars in the window.
They were different colored stars. The solid gold stars were the stars. Damn it. They were stars of the boys that never came back.
Well, there was all kinds of sailors and soldiers in the street. We didn't know what happened. Everybody was running up and kissing you, and you didn't know what the heck was going on. In fact, we kind of got scared. Then they said the war was over.
Now the world was truly ready for peace. Certainly the veteran of that war hoped he had brought about a world that would be free of war forever after.
The big thing was we were all out on the streets, banging pots and pans and running up and down the streets happy the war was over.
And I remember me and my cousin named Frank Ferrara, he and I joined this pots and pans parade, and we marched around the hill banging my parents' pots and pans and just yelling and screaming and hoorays and thank God that the war is over.
So they tied cans on my belt on a string and sent me out in the sidewalk of the front of the house, running up and down the street, and there were kids running all over the place. And they've got pictures of people at different stop signs and the like, just holding up a can of beer, you know, waiting for the boys to get back.
The GI Bill of Rights was not a reward, or a handout, or a gravy train, but rather an American way to make it easier for each man to take his place once again in the community and get some of those things for which he went to war: a job, a business, an education, a home.
If you were a city planner and you came to the Hill in 1945 and asked, what's the future of the Hill? The answer almost certainly would have been, it cannot last.
This isn't a trend that had something to do with the Hill. This is a trend that had something to do with post-World War II America, where, you know, your goal in life was to grow up someplace and then eventually move to the suburbs, get a bigger house. That was what America wanted, and they realized they were kind of swimming upstream against sort of a national trend, and wanted to figure out how to buck it.
Like most neighborhoods, urban, things started slowly because all these GIs all at once returned. You had all this pent-up desire to get married. And so what you had in most neighborhoods, urban settings, again, was crowded conditions. But here's where it changes. West of a street called Sublet on a hill, there were a few older homes, but mostly vacant lots. And here you had all this, maybe a half square mile of territory, pristine and unused.
Next thing you know, everybody's building a home and moving in. This place probably doubled the number of homes.
When the young men returned from the war, they wanted to stay in the neighborhood where they grew up, where their roots were. They didn't want to go outside or move to the suburbs. They wanted to live here, build their houses, raise their Italian family, just like their parents did.
Looking at the Hill as a whole in the 60s and 70s, in some ways it was a cocoon that all the countercultural forces, Woodstock, Summers of Love, all the disintegrating elements didn't seem to affect the Hill.
Things were changing back in the 60s, and a lot of things on the, around the nation were changing, but it seemed like on the Hill, things really didn't change. It's kind of stayed the same.
There was an insulation. I grew up with Martin Luther King and the Vietnam War. Yeah, we had longer hair, but I don't think we really knew about all that was going on. We knew more about Christopher Columbus and America Vespucci than other people who were the heroes of the day.
I would say that I had a pretty sheltered childhood. Everything to make you happy and to make your life wonderful was here in the neighborhood.
In the early 1960s, a new leader emerges on the Hill, Father Salvatore Pulizzi. He had a vision for the Hill, and he wasn't afraid to speak his own mind, even if it rubbed some people the wrong way.
Oh, I think he came at a perfect time because things were starting to kind of settle down a little bit. People were getting a little complacent, and they weren't had that gung-ho Italian fever anymore. And he certainly did reinstill that in all of us.
Monsignor Pulizzi, Father Pulizzi, was kind of a rebel in the priesthood at the time. He would do things not as old-fashioned as the rest. And what Father Pulizzi did that was so unique is he united everybody.
He had a charisma. I personally witnessed people who said and could not stand Monsignor Pulizzi. But if he called them and said, I need you to do this, those people who would talk so bad about him would do exactly what he asked them to do. He just had that sort of charisma.
Yeah. People believe he drove around with a ruler in his car, because if your grass was a certain height over, he would knock on your door and say, it's time to cut your grass.
And then you'd go to confession and confess. He goes, wait a minute. I know a couple other things you did for him, and you better tell me those too. Okay, Father. Oh no, he would take a walk through the school. I would say he's probably like a CEO of a big corporation, and the Hill was his corporation.
Father Pulizzi was not a shy man. He could be brash, he could be in your face, but the goal was always for the betterment of the Hill. He was witnessing the decline of all these immigrant communities. Across America, little Italies were dying. So I think that's an important part of his mindset is the Hill should be preserved. This is a fight worth fighting.
I think you have to look at the time that we're talking about. I mean, there was a feeling in the United States, that American cities were kind of doomed for whatever reason, the suburbanization, ethnic prejudices, and there was a general feeling about in the country, not just in St. Louis, that there was really not much of a future for cities.
Other neighborhoods all to the east of the hill just fell completely apart. The Shaw neighborhood right past us was in the 70s the highest crime rate. It was worse than any other crime you see going on right now. It was a war zone, battle zone. Monsignor saw all that occurring around us. He saw the natural barriers, and trying to keep people to stay is what made this neighborhood so unique. None of us left.
So Father Pulizzi creates Hill 2000, a neighborhood organization whose primary goal is getting the residents of the Hill to stay.
When we started the Hill 2000, the first thing we did was come up with a slogan, and it said, "Pride Builds." And we slapped that baby all over the neighborhood. And if there was anything that would lead you to believe that your activities were not bringing pride to our neighborhood, we'd probably tell you about it.
Hill 2000 in their original motto, Pride Builds. As long as the neighborhood was kept beautiful and clean and made to be an attractive place to live, the neighborhood would be strong. That was taught to us, oh my gosh, when we were in grade school, that was taught to us and bred into us, yeah.
One of the slogans of Hill 2000 was "Don't move, improve." And the idea was the best communities are those that have generations of people deep. We want people who want to be here for the right reasons.
People took it to heart, don't move, improve, and people started siding their tar paper shacks. They started tearing some things down and staying and making the rest of the world go around us. Part of Hill 2000's mantra was, if you're going to do something, let's control it. For sale signs were non-existent.
Did you ever see a for sale sign on the hill?
No, that was all. I think it was the first insider trading, okay? No, everything went through him. I mean, everything went through him.
What we did is we bought properties. Let's say we bought a property for $20,000, put in $2,000 and fixed it up. You got $22,000 in it. We sold it to a young kid who lived in the neighborhood for $18,000. The banks didn't like what we were doing, but who cares?
Pulizzi would sit down and he would put the property owner together with a list. See, we used to have a list here. If you wanted a house on the hill, you'd come and put your name on a list. It wasn't to keep realtors out or keep different ethnic groups out. It was, we had 100 people that grew up in this neighborhood that want to live in this neighborhood. So what Pulizzi did was very simple. You got a house, I got a person, let's go to the bank, they got a loan, everybody wins.
Father Pulizzi did what he had to do at that time, to make the community better. I mean, if it upset people, he did what he thought was best for the community.
The 1970s presented Pulizzi and the Hill with three great challenges and crises. Someone wanted to pump tens of thousands of effluent into abandoned clay mines, and Pulizzi and the Hill stopped that. There was a project to build a drive-in movie theater on the hill. They mobilized forces and stopped that. Those were kind of relatively easy challenges. The greatest challenge was Interstate 44 wanted to lop off an island off the northern edge of the hill.
Well, Highway 44, first of all, I thought it was going to kill us. As a matter of fact, it took my parents home. A lot of people had to be moved around the hill.
This was a big deal that they were going to be disconnected. This was dividing the hill. That was the big thing. The hill was going to be divided.
Terrible. Everybody, it was terrible.
The Hill isn't 50,000 people. It's probably, 1,500 families. And we grew up on Patterson, so they took our house.
Some of my friends lost their homes. Some of our relatives lost their store to the highway.
And it took lifelong residents and people that have put their heart and soul in here, that lived here for 30, 40, 50 years, had to move. Businesses were shut down, and people that you were born and raised with were gone.
They didn't want to get off the hill. But for a while there, some of them were ready to have a heart attack, really. It was a jolt to a lot of people. And I kind of sympathize with them.
The lore I've been told all my life, and I believe it's been documented, there's at least 2 or 3 people who died of heart attacks knowing that their home was taken away from them. They've come here from the old country to make their life. They found their life. They found a community, a church, and a sense of being, and it was all taken away from them by the government, and they just could not believe it.
I just thought it was a disaster that they were going to come through that neighborhood. And there was no rhyme or reason for them to do what they did. They could have moved that thing another block north, and all the people would have been on one side of that highway. And we decided we were going to fight it.
So there was a movement on the Hill, really led by Father Pulizzi, to build an overpass that allow people to go across and keep the Hill from being so separated. And all the political leaders on the Hill joined forces with leaders of the Democratic Party, certainly in Missouri.
I think their primary concern was, in the event of emergency, getting first responders into that part of the neighborhood. But I think a strong secondary reason they wanted that overpass was because of the people that were isolated on the other side of the highway. They could have a way to get across without going to the busy Kings Highway or Macklin avenues.
It might be Pulizzi's finest hour and the Hill's finest hour. They went to the city, no luck. They went to Governor Hearns, and Hearns turned them down, that we can't do anything about it. The only place left was the federal government. Nixon is president. His Secretary of Transportation is John Volpe, an Italian American, and they had a conference in Washington, D.C. Someone made the famous pledge, the Hill will put in a chip worth $50,000. Hardly enough money, but it was a symbolic chip. And Nixon, Volpe all agreed we'll build the overpass over the Hill. Symbolically, this is huge. The Hill took on the feds, it took on Jefferson City, it took on St. Louis City Hall. They won.
After the Highway 44 victory, Father Pulizzi would become recognized throughout the United States for his efforts. He was named as one of the most promising leaders in Time magazine, and President Jimmy Carter even offered him a position at the White House that he turned down. Father Pulizzi's sole purpose was to serve the people of the Hill. However, his tenure at St. Ambrose would be cut much shorter than anyone expected.
When Monsignor Pulizzi, we were notified that he was going to be leaving St. Ambrose, everybody was heartbroken. Nobody could ever replace Monsignor Pulizzi.
Very sad. A very, very sad day. It was like someone died.
Well, we were afraid because he was a guiding light on the Hill, and we were kind of afraid. I objected. I wrote a bunch of letters to Archbishop May, and finally Archbishop May got tired of them and told Father Pulizzi to get me to stop writing them.
Well, I can be honest with you, we were going to have probably 5,000 people put a petition down on Lindo Avenue. And he came to us and says, my boss is the bishop and I go where he tells me to go. I just think that
My whole life was up there, and so I just really didn't want to leave the neighborhood. But you know, we're priests and we're saints, and I got the call to come here, and so I came here.
If there was one person who rejuvenated the sense of our Italianness, our religious heritage, our pride in who we are because of what we did in this neighborhood, it was him.
The Hill would not exist today without Father Pulizzi. Absolutely not.
He truly saved this city. If he doesn't make this neighborhood strong, the blight that was coming this way would have ran over this neighborhood, and the folks south of us, St. Louis Hills, wouldn't have stood a chance. He secured this neighborhood.
Why do you think food is so important to the Italian people?
Well, because it's the best one we got. Eat is number one. We eat, that's all we do, eat. That's how everybody get fat, because he eat. You know what I mean?
Food. Well, it goes without saying, when you think of Italians, you think of food.
It's cliche and it's stereotypical, but you've got Sunday dinner. That was the focal point of the week. You had everybody, grandma, grandpa, the kids, the babies, moms, the dads, the aunts and uncles all around a communal table with giant bowls of pasta and meatballs and salsiccia and bread. You know, you started at 3 o'clock and at 8 o'clock at night you were heading home.
Let me tell you something, on Sunday, there wasn't a better smelling neighborhood than the Hill. All them moms being there cooking. Everybody made sauce on Sunday, everybody. So it was the best smelling neighborhood.
The aroma of all the different foods coming from different homes. You walk home from school and the moms were cooking already, or the grandmas, and there was just sense of food everywhere, and it was an Italian smell, and the bakeries.
The garlic and the olive oils and it was just unbelievable. In their own bread. A lot of people made their own bread, and they baked their own bread. Because in the basements in a lot of these homes up here on the hill, there are sub-basements where they had a stove, and they baked their own bread. It was really something. When you walked from my house to the church, you were hungry. Man.
It's like the whole world of the universe of food has conspired to be in one spot in the city of St. Louis for the Italian vintage. And it's true, there are about 28 restaurants and delis in the greater Hill area.
On Saturday, you can't walk, because so many people, all the stores packed. Restaurant is all packed, everybody. Any restaurant you go, it's packed.
I think the Hill is experiencing a renaissance unbelievable right now. And the Hill has always been a stable neighborhood because people watch out for each other. You know, people really care about their roots and where they came from. And a lot of people are moving back to the Hill.
It means a lot to me to come back to the house that I was born and raised in. I guess I could have moved someplace else, but it didn't feel like home. This has always been home and always will be. It's a great place to live. And people are, particularly now, are appreciating that. And I can only say that it's just the people who lived there and who wanted to continue to support it sort of through the various ups and downs of real estate in America.
One thing about the Hill, one of the ways that we've kept it special and kept the generations on the Hill is we have a tendency of passing the houses down through the generations. That's kind of what keeps the Hill in business, is those strong generations of people trying to do what their elders did.
Just to know that, you know, your family was here before is just something like I feel special to me. You know, I get to raise my kids in the house that I always wanted to be in growing up.
What's really neat today, so many young people that are Italians and they're buying homes on the Hill. That's what's really neat. That's terrific.
People do move to the Hill because they want to be immersed in the heritage and the culture and the way of life in the neighborhood. That is kind of the attraction of the Hill, is what brings them in, and I think it's something that they want to be a part of.
It's a neighborhood. Neighborhoods don't seem to exist anymore. These people, they can't believe that there's people living in houses next to a tavern with a bakery and a church and a shop. You know, they all get in their cars, leave their driveways, and have to go 5 miles to a strip mall to find all the things they want. You know, this is how people all used to live, and this has always been that way.
People want to come and see what our neighborhood looked like back in 1950 and 1960. It hasn't changed much. A few different businesses are open, but it's still the same neighborhood, still the same streets. It's still the same old neighborhood I grew up in, and it's got class.
Little Italies in America are pretty much gone. Many in other cities cling to the concept of Little Italy. It's merely a facade of what it used to be. Maybe it's 1 block long now, where there's mostly Italians, or 2 square blocks long. Or you still have a series of Italian restaurants in the area.
They're storefronts, they're restaurants, they're, they sell flags and necklaces that have the Italian flag on it and call themselves Little Italy. The one here, we are still a neighborhood and we really exist in that Italian-American tradition.
Look at Little Italy's gone in New York. That was the capital of all Italians in the United States, was Little Italy. It's gone, and now it's Chinatown. Think about that. Little Italy turned into Chinatown.
People sold out, man. You know, they sold out and went to Jersey. There's no other way to put it, you know? I mean, you know, so everything in New York is kind of like, you know, went this way and that way and this way and that way. And I, you know, attribute it to, you know, life in New York City is definitely not as easy as life is here in a city like St. Louis, you know?
We stayed. They moved. We stayed in our neighborhood. We fight for our neighborhood. We love our neighborhood. We didn't leave. And that's the one thing that if you go to New York, Little Italy, if you go to Chicago, if you go to Boston, they don't live in their community like we do. We live where we work. Loyalty from every Italian person there. They passed their homes down to their children. They passed their homes down to their children. They kept it Italian. And that's why it's an Italian neighborhood.
You know, with the economy, you've been through 2 world wars, you've been through a Great Depression, you've been through a major recession, and this neighborhood has seen the worst and the best of this country, and it's still vibrant, it's still attractive, it still has that sense of safety, community. So 20, 30, 40 years from now, I really don't see it going anywhere.
I see it being here always. I don't think the Hill's ever going to go away. If you want to name a neighborhood that's always going to be here, Hill's going to be here. There's no two ways about that.
You know what you got here, and you know it's going to remain the way it is. And as long as there's people that are around and are willing to do what is required to keep it the same, and it takes a lot of people into consideration. Now, you got to have the church. If you don't have the church, you don't have it, because that is the guiding light.
People want to stay. People want to come back. People are looking for a community. Go back to the center, which is called the church and the school. What we're seeing in our school is we're seeing the potential next year of a 5th generation going through our school. And so those kind of things speak volumes to the people who have committed themselves to this neighborhood, to this identity as being Italian. And that's what it's all about, you know? And what we do is we maintain a beautiful campus, you know, so that as the church goes, the neighborhood goes.
Me like the hill is, and the time better the time where I come from. The hill, they give me everything. I got my 2 sons born on the hill. I got a job. I got everything on the hill. The hill is like my time where I come from. See, a lot of people are Italian, loving, they play bocce, everything. That's it. We see no problemi qui. They're imbriolati. You know what is imbriolati? You make the dough like pizza and they fill it up. You take the lamb roast, they put everything on top. Anchovy, salami, salsiccia, spinaci, a lot of spinaci, and they put it 2 different things. Lasagna. Sunday they gotta be lasagna and lamb roast. Every Sunday different. Thank you, and thank you everybody.